upon the inauguration of Delcy Rodriguez, who is now the successor to Maduro, it was the Chinese, Iranian, and Russian ambassadors who were the first foreign dignitaries to kind of greet her in her new position at the inauguration. This is a pretty strong signal, I believe, of intention to stay engaged, even if it's not come to the protection necessarily. It is definitely, I think it's a very important symbol and signal of intention.
When US Special Forces captured Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro in a surprise nighttime raid earlier this month, Moscow conspicuously failed to ride to the defence of its ally, a country with which it signed a vague strategic partnership. Equally, when the US then seized 2 tankers accused of shipping Venezuelan oil under the Russian flag, the Russians only warned that tanker seizure risked creating further military and political tension in the Euro-Atlantic. So why has Russia let the US take Venezuela without much of a response? And what does it mean for Putin now? Well, let's ask Ivan Kłyszcz, a research fellow at the International Centre for Defence and Security. Welcome to Times at 1. When did Russia and Venezuela grow close?
So the high point of relations between Russia and Venezuela was under Hugo Chavez, the first, what they call Bolivarian president of Venezuela, kind of left-wing populist, conspicuously anti-American in his foreign policy, seeking to coalesce the countries of the region to create some sort of bloc that would be autonomous or even anti-American, in support of Cuba. And in this context, we're talking about the 2000s. In this context, Russia's turn towards a confrontation policy with Europe, especially after Vladimir Putin's 2007 Munich speech. It was then that Russia and Venezuela became much closer in this shared attitude towards the United States, especially.
Right, and as you say, it was sort of part of a move by Russia and Putin to have sort of bulwarks against American power projection. Has the 4 years of war, the invasion of Ukraine, left Russia just too stretched to actually protect or ride to the defence of some of its allies like Iran and Venezuela?
There's no question that right now the top issue for the Kremlin, for every aspect of the Russian elite is Ukraine. It's their full-scale war of aggression against Ukraine. They thought that it would be a very short war, just a few days maybe, and it turned out to be longer than the war efforts of the Second World War that the Soviet Union carried out in those years. In that sense, every decision is about Ukraine, and all partnerships around the world that Russia has are seen through the lens of Ukraine and of sustaining their war of aggression. In that sense, partners such as far away, such as in Venezuela or in Syria or Iran, they're weighed according to how much they contribute to Russia's war effort. Because that's the thing, is that these partnerships, they're not really alliances the way we understand, for instance, NATO or any other coalition within the West. These are mostly partnerships of interest. There might be some, like I mentioned earlier, some orientation against the US, for instance, and some sort of coalition in that sense, but it comes down to hard interests. And in the case of Russia and Venezuela, a lot of that came down to energy, defense procurement, some security cooperation at the level of intelligence agencies, but ultimately it was about exchanging interests. And that's really not the basis for a trusting long-term partnership in defense.
Yes, so it was rather transactional, as you are saying, rather than a sort of deep embedded relationship. So how do you quantify the loss of Nicolas Maduro or Venezuela in terms of any sort of partnership? What does it mean for Putin, or does it just not matter?
I think there's still a lot that's up in the air. That's hard to pin down. Where are we? The loss of Maduro, I don't believe it's a dramatic setback for Moscow. A hypothetical loss of Venezuela would be a pretty large regional setback. But Maduro, according to what we know, he was already he's always been kind of a weak leader. He never fully rose to the level that Hugo Chavez had in Latin America or in Venezuela itself. He's always been a bit unpopular. especially as the economic troubles in Venezuela have only deepened under his rule. So in that sense, Maduro himself is not as important as the Chavista regime is, because what we've seen is that since Maduro's capture is that a lot of the regime has stayed in place. A lot of the key people who were around Maduro are still kind of in office for the most part, I believe. And Russia has been working with these individuals already in the past. And there's signals that they intend to continue to do so. Upon the inauguration of Delcy Rodriguez, who is now the successor to Maduro, it was the Chinese, Iranian, and Russian ambassadors who were the first foreign dignitaries to kind of greet her in her new position at the inauguration. This is a pretty strong signal, I believe, of intention to stay engaged, even if it's not come to the protection necessarily. It is definitely, I think it's a very important symbol and signal of intention.
Right. I mean, in that sense, what does it mean for Russia in the context of the war in Ukraine?
Venezuela, in the context of the war in Ukraine, is part of a wider strategy that Moscow has embraced of mirroring in their mind, in the mind of the people of the Kremlin, or rather in their strategy, their security moves in South America and Latin America. They're meant to mirror, so to speak, what they see as U.S. intrusions into their sphere of influence, supposed sphere of influence. So whenever there's U.S. support for Ukraine, for instance, they will support Cuba or Nicaragua or any other regime in Latin America that they perceive as aligned with them. So that was kind of the key role that Venezuela played in Russia's global foreign policy up until the full-scale war, where this type of mirroring became, it just didn't match. It just doesn't match when there's a actual shooting war of this scale and dimension. So in that sense, Venezuela's importance for Russia remains quite high because it is an important player in Latin America and an important anchor in the Caribbean for Russia's power projection. But in the context of the war, this type of mirror strategy or approach is only diminishing in value. And I think Maduro's kind of lack of popularity and lack of leadership only compounded on this.
Ivan Kłyszcz, a research fellow at the International Centre for Defence and Security. Thank you for talking to us about Venezuela and the relationship with Russia.